Welcome back. You're still watching the Daily Debate, and I'm honored to be having with me over the program for tonight Dr. Abbas Zoghari, the economic and development expert. Thank you very much for being with us tonight, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Of course, we have seen the arrival of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi yesterday in Rio de Janeiro of Brazil, and today we have seen a number of activities for President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. First of all, how do you see the importance of Egypt being there, represented by President al-Sisi in Brazil at the G20 summit?
It's very important. As you will know, Egypt is not a G20 country.
Yes.
But because of all the development and for the infrastructure, what Egypt has done in the last 9 years, not only in Egypt and also in Africa, that has been invited. This is the second time. The first time was last year in India, and the second time this year in Brazil.
But this is the fourth participation. Because we've been in China, India, Japan, and Brazil now.
That was before.
Yes.
I'm talking about the last 2 years.
Yes.
And
2023, 2024.
23 and 2024. Yes. And actually, it's for President Sisi. It's very important to meet with the leader of the world, and that he can discuss all the problems which we have surround us, and it costs us plenty of money, and it makes our economy growing a little bit slower. And I think it's very important.
You mentioned that we are not a member of the G20, the biggest 20 economies in the world, including the European Union, and of course for today as well, the African Union. But this means that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi was invited to be joining the G20 summit. What does this say about the stature of Egypt, especially in the past 10 or 11 years under the tenure of President al-Sisi?
Well, actually it was very difficult for Egypt to join such summit. And Egypt was not invited for nothing. Egypt was invited because the whole world seen that Egypt has made a lot of development in the last 9 years,
yes,
which was not happened in the last 50 or 30 years. And this has astonished the most of the world leader, and therefore they would like to know how Egypt done that. And also in these days, in the last months or the 2 months, we find that we are, as Egyptian or as Egypt, invited through another countries, Arabian countries, for example,
yes,
Iraq, and then a lot of countries, and Libya, to make the infrastructures there for the bridges and the roads and the infrastructures, and then also the transportation,
yes,
which has been done in Egypt the last few years. So Egypt was not invited for nothing. Egypt was invited because the Egyptian and the Egyptian president and the government has shown that they could be also one of the leaders in the world.
Yes, one of the main priorities for the G20 summit for this year is to be combating poverty, combating hunger, and the social inclusion. These are some of the challenges that are facing the world countries, but how did you see Egypt dealing with those challenges after the 2013 revolution here, and more specifically under the tenure of President al-Sisi?
Actually, Egypt is busy with this project since a few years.
Yes.
I will take an example for Generous Life. The project of Generous Life, which has cost a lot of money.
Yes.
We are not there yet, but we have been started since 3 years or 4 years back.
Yes.
Also, as you can remember, or in Cairo and in the other places in Egypt,
yes,
the housing. How Egypt changed the housing for the poor people in the poor area, because they were living in ranches and they were living in places which was not inhuman. And now they have changed it for buildings and compound, which gives the opportunity for the poor people to live in it. If I'm talking about the poverty, we have a lot of poverty in Egypt, but we are not as poor country. We are a good country,
yes,
but we are not poor as everybody's seen us. But because of the high prices in the last time, which has affected the most of the world, and not only Egypt.
Yes.
Egyptian people are suffering a lot from the high prices which they have to pay for the food. But I can tell you something which I have realized in the last months.
Yes.
Since the new government, I'm very pleased with the new government because the ministers of this government are young and they are working very hard day and night, not because they are like this, but because they have to. The president gives them the order, and I think it's going to be much better than the past 5 years.
Yes, we've mentioned early on in the program that Egypt had participated in the G20 summit 3 times before, and this is the 4th time to be there. We had China in 2016, and then Japan in 2019, India in 2023, and Brazil in 2024. Those 4 countries are in the BRICS, and Egypt has joined recently the BRICS as well. What a coincidence. What does this mean?
Well, you are not easily to come in the BRICS if you are not stronger. The Egyptian economy is not so weak as people think.
Yes.
But Egyptian economy and the Egyptian economy grow. As we expect this year, that will be 5.3, and our reserve is getting each month more and more. As I could remember, our reserve now is about $47 million, which we can deal with it in this modern world.
Yes.
It's needed. But because of what Egypt have for resources and also the geo-policy, it gives us the opportunity and the chance to join with those people. And as our climate is cleaner than other countries, we are working in the clean energy since a very long time, and we are using every possibility of saving water because of the problem which we have. And we announce this to the world, and I'm very pleased and glad that this is accepted by the most of the world.
Yes, and we have seen yesterday that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi had arrived in Rio de Janeiro upon an invitation by the Brazilian counterpart, Lula da Silva, for today, the first day of the G20 summits on the 18th of November. We have seen a meeting between the Egyptian and the Brazilian presidents. How do you see the significance of such a meeting? Of course, we will be speaking about the details of it.
President da Silva is one of the leaders in the world.
Yes.
He has changed the income for the Brazilian from none to a lot. And he has worked of the poverty since the beginning of his first stage as president, because this is the second presidency.
Yes.
And of course, the Brazilian president and President Sisi, since they met each other in India last year, the relation between Brazil and Egypt is much stronger. And I think that Mr. da Silva, the president of Brazil, would like to make a lot of business with Egypt. And as I have seen today, they have signed a lot of agreement about the economic and about export and import, which gives a sign for a better future and a better relation in Egypt, I think. This will help Egypt because Brazil has a long history with the poverty. And I think we will learn from them as they will learn from us.
To be upgrading the bilateral relations or the bilateral ties between Egypt and Brazil to a strategic partnership, what does this mean? How this will be reflected on the economy of both countries, and more specifically in Egypt, because you mentioned that there is an expertise in Brazil that we could be transferring into here.
In Brazil, they do have a lot of resources. What's the most of it is meat and all the food. They got a lot of food, as we do, but they got more than we do.
And football.
And the prices in Brazil is much cheaper than any other country in the world. So I think Egypt will have a lot of good relation which can affect it the prices
Yes.
and affected the standard of living in Egypt. It is not only in food production, but also in industrial production.
Yes, we have seen the agreement for today, and to be raising the bilateral ties between both countries to a strategic partnership. It will be reflected on the economic and the social aspects of the bilateral ties between Egypt and Brazil. How do you think this will be reflected on the social aspect here in Egypt? How can we be transferring the expertise or the know-how there to here?
The know-how in Brazil, as I know,
Yes.
is very high, but is not spreading in the most of the world. Not because they are not known, they are known, but they are not open to the world than other countries. And I think that Egypt will use this expert from the Brazilian, for example, for car industry, that is number one, and the second one for food industry. We do have a lot of resources, but our food industry is not as much as them, and is not as much as the world want for equalization of the prices which we have. So I think this will be for Egypt win-win situation.
Yes, Doctor, as an economic expert as yourself, one of the main priorities of the G20 summit and one of the main discussions that will be tackled during the summit for today and tomorrow as well is the reform of the global financial structure. What do you think is needing to be structured by the G20 leaders this time around?
Well, the G20 is meaning to help the developing country. And to help the developing country, you need finance.
Yes.
And from where you get the finance? They get the finance from the IMF. And as we have expert with the IMF in the past few years,
yes,
using the IMF loans has affected Egypt, and it changed a lot. For example, they were watching our economy, which we were easier with it. And they forced us to make some steps and to take steps for the prices without knowing that this will affect our internal market and on our prices in Egypt. And this has affected us. And now they would like to fight poverty and to force the banks
yes,
that they could give loan to the developing country with a good rate and without pushing them to change a lot of things internal that people could be anger. So they would like to take the anger out of the people while the bank can help the country to be developing in a lot of things.
Yes, today we have seen President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi addressing the first session of the G20 summit, of course thanking the Brazilian president for inviting him for the G20 summit. But President al-Sisi also thanked the Brazilian president on launching the International Alliance for Combating Hunger and Poverty and to be gaining social inclusion. How do you see the importance of the G20 summit launching the International Alliance for Combating Hunger and Poverty?
Well, if the G20 will be working fair, that will change a lot in the world.
Yes.
But as I see in the last night, you got a lot of strong countries. I will not mention one, but we know all the 19 country member of the G20, and they are not working as it should be. There is a summit every year,
yes,
or from here and now. But the result of the summit is not quicker as we think. For example, Africa, they get a lot of resources,
yes,
and it has been taken through other people. And the African people, they live in a poverty and in hunger, without energy, without anything.
yes,
And no one gives them a hand. Egypt started since the President Sisi was the leader of the African summit, and he put them abroad. He brought them abroad to the European countries and to the States, and now the African got as much as the European Union in the G20. So by all means, I hope that those people, like the States and the Canadian and the German and the European Union, will be using the force and the money to help the developing country without pushing them to change a lot of things internal and then making the prices higher, that people can be angry and then forcing them to do things against them.
Yes, we will be speaking about the Egyptian experience in combating hunger and poverty here in the country, but allow me, Doctor, to be going to the other report of the daily debate for tonight, focusing on the Egyptian participation in the G20 summit in the developing ministerial meeting in Brazil with the participation of the Minister of International Cooperation, Dr. Rania Al-Bashat. We'll be having more details in the upcoming reports, so stay tuned.